there's a copy of it somewhere.
In 1987, a friend of the band, Ryan Agner, was instrumental in helping the band towards their first steps towards stardom. The band used to practice and eat at Ryan's house, and unlike the rest of the band, he held down a stable job.
And I would come by Chris and Shelley's house on my way home from work, and one day Chris says, hey, Kurt and I have got this band together. So we went to this little house over on the east side of Aberdeen. So anyway, we wandered on in, and it was pretty scary, borrowed equipment and all sort of set up in this living room, and I started playing. And it was good from the beginning. Kurt rarely worked and had little money, and so before too long we got to be friends and whatnot, and I worked and I was comfortable, and I would cook and eat well, and so I'd invite him over for dinner, and of course then we'd talk more about music. Kurt felt that that there wasn't a lot of new territory to be discovered with music, particularly for himself, because he had made probably what he considered to be a relatively thorough study of music for our age. He was more interested in the melody, and the way its counterpoint with the rest of the song, how it worked, the grand scheme, the total package. That's what he was delivering. Did it rock? Did it get you the hook?
More oxygen, more oxygen, more oxygen.
The band carried on developing their underground punk style, and for the first time seriously considered playing to an audience. In 1987, Ryan got the band their first gig by suggesting they play at a small party thrown by his friends Tony Pecula and Jeff Forrest. The now legendary performance took place in the front room of Tony and Jeff's house in the nearby small town of Raymond.
And I ran into Tony one day and I said, you know, there's these dudes that I discovered, this band, and they're cool, man. They got this stuff going on, and you guys jam once in a while down here, don't you? You know, Friday night party, you know, strike up the band, that kind of thing. He's like, yeah, we do that. And I said, well, we ought to get these guys to come down, because the way it played in my head was, you know, these guys rock.
Turn the lights out when you try to hide. When your brain begins to wander, drop the gun and shallow.
It was, to all intents and purposes, the first Nirvana show. They played to a crowd of a dozen mullet-headed, metal-loving teenagers. The trio performed a chaotic set, including Downer, Spank Through and Aero Zeppelin. Tony and his friends were all there on that infamous night.
I remember sitting in there and thinking, wow, this is really different than anything that we've been listening to, and I liked it, but then you would hear comments from other people, you know, because they wanted, you know, the heavy metal hair bands.
They wanted us up there
and
playing.
Nirvana was different, and they didn't appreciate the difference, but there was a lot of people that did.
Yeah.
Chris was really into his guitar. He wanted the feedback, and he'd kind of lay his guitar down, and we would all just
Yeah, I mean, that was a big
plug in our
thing.
ears.
What the different thing was is all that feedback.
Their performance didn't benefit from acoustics. I mean, it was.
The thing that struck me was Chris's bass playing. I mean, I picked that up first. I mean, he was just a phenomenal bass player. I just thought, wow, he was really good. And I mean, as far as talent goes, I could see those guys going somewhere. But at the time, it's like I said, you know, we all thought that, you know, it's just another band coming to play.
Kurt's voice kind of struck me as unusual too. I remember thinking about his voice, and it wasn't melodious. It was just it was good, and it was different from anything that I've heard before, and I was appreciating that also.
If you run the reel forward and look at the sort of classic Nirvana performance. It was all there, everything. Same thing he did that night was same show he put on 4 or 5 years later. But he terrorized the sound waves that night.
Totally antisocial. I don't remember him speaking the whole night, looking up, making eye contact with anybody.
Even most of the pictures you see, hair covering his face.
Well, Chris was a different story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was much more social.
Absolutely.
He was into more of the shock, trying to
Yeah.
shock everyone. He had vampire blood, and he was putting it on him, and
Duct tape over his
Duct tape.
nipples.
That's right, I remember that. Yeah. They were jumping on the furniture, standing on the coffee table, jumping on the couch.
laying the guitar down and having the feedback. And
they did start off like that. It kind of started out a little bit mellow, and I think the more they got into the beer, the more that they got rambunctious, and that's when they started getting really...
The style came out then.
And after a while, the sort of music side of the night petered out, and I started kind of making sure where everybody was and that things were okay, and that's when I noticed that things were not okay. The two camps had gotten into this sort of harassment mode where, you know, Chris was belligerent and doing things, and Kurt was trying to upset people with his verbal abuse and whatnot. And
they didn't have a lot of respect for anyone's property.
No.
Not that it was anything special, but
Not
what we
that
had is
anybody
what
who
we
came
had.
here really had respect for the property.
No.
Aaron came up to me and said, "It's time to go." Okay, I think you're right.
The atmosphere that night had got to the point that it was time for them to go. And I just remember them all jumping in the back of this van or carpet truck or whatever it was. There was no lights in the back of it. It was like a
No windows,
no windows. It was
ventilation.
like a rented U-Haul truck or something. And I just remember them all jumping in the back of that thing and slamming the door down, and off they went. And I think we all just kind of came in to survey the damage by that point.
In the grand scheme of things, for many years, it was not one of my greater moments, you know. The beginning of Nirvana was a shaky ordeal for everybody involved.
Once in a while, once in a while, once in a while.
At a local level, the band's determination paid off, slowly developing a loyal fan base in Aberdeen and the surrounding area. But life was still hard for Kurt, taking on many poorly paid jobs to support his music and living rough for many months to come.
The Community World Theater on 56th Street and M in Tacoma, Washington, Jim May's operation there, and it fulfilled a relatively vital need for the growth of Nirvana as a performance band and for our audience.
Well, the first time that I really went to see his band was right after they recorded the Andino demo with Crover. They played a show in Tacoma at the Community World Theater or whatever. It was a little teeny dumpy place that probably used to be a porn theater. And they played with this straight-edge hardcore band. And they were really good.
There was a lot of local talent at that time that was really phenomenal. And I think people need to understand that Nirvana were one of a dozen bands that really were bands that were on the rise in '88 and '89.
And then these were important gigs. I remember Kurt actually worrying about, you know, his wardrobe. What was he going to wear? He kind of wanted to wear these funky disco shoes. He thought it'd be funny or something, you know. and would pine over the set it up just so, and you know, this was a big deal. This was to go up there and play in front of people was it. There was, you know, there was nothing, no consideration to what would ultimately happen, and it was painful, you know, because a lot of times nobody'd show up. I mean, just being in the place was painful. They wouldn't have the heat on or anything, and you know, it was pretty primitive in there. That was the proving ground for Nirvana.
Their live shows were really hit or miss, and I think that it's really hard when a band has become so successful and so powerful. All the stories become apocryphal. The story all becomes, they were fantastic. The first time I saw them, I knew they were genius. And anybody that tells that story is probably making it up, because there were very few people in the Seattle music scene that thought they were great live. I always thought they were better on record. Their live shows, at least early on. Later on, they became a better live band than they were on record, I think.
The natural progression for any band wanting to break out of Aberdeen at the time was to base themselves in the nearby town of Olympia. Kurt had visited Olympia during 1987 while acting as an unpaid roadie for the Melvins. At the time, it was a hip college town with a reputation for being a hotbed of artists, freaks and underground musicians. Kurt was keen to move in straight away. It was another friend of the band, Slim Moon, who recognised their combined talent and arranged for their first gig in Olympia, becoming an ardent follower of the band.
I've seen a lot of great Nirvana shows, and the one that stands out for me was a show on Halloween one year. They just really went all out and just smashed the crap out of their guitars, and just really, it just felt so explosive. After they had played such a great, just really awesome, powerful music, and then they just like went crazy at the end.
It was also about the time that Nirvana played at Chaos. That's the little college radio there at Evergreen State College in Olympia. That show was important because a lot of bootlegs were made. It was virtually the first recorded Nirvana ever made, other than the recording that I have of the Raymond show. That recording made the rounds and set the stage for what would later be the buzz.
Continued to play at parties and small venues in the Olympia area. During this time, however, their drummer Aaron Burkhart dropped out, leaving Kurt and Chris with the thankless task of finding a replacement. But the duo managed to persuade Dale Crover from the Melvins to fill in temporarily, and in January 1988 drove up to Reciprocal Studios in Seattle to record their first demo tracks. The big break had come after a phone call from Kurt to local rock legend producer Jack Endino. Having been impressed by the chemistry formed by Kurt, Chris and the already well-respected Melvins drummer, Endino agreed to record the band for a minuscule fee. This resulted in the first tracks being recorded for the future Nirvana album Bleach.
I just got a phone call from a guy named Kurt from Aberdeen who said he was a friend of the Melvins and he wanted to come up and record, and he would have Dale from the Melvins playing drums with him. And since I held Dale's drumming in very high regard, I said, yeah, come on up, let's do it. How much money do you want to spend? How much time do you want to book? And he said, well, we've only got, a few $100s. We just have time for one afternoon, and we're just going to record some songs and just mix them right on the spot as fast as we can. And, you make a tape, get some shows with it or whatever. And he said, well, we don't really have a name yet. We're still looking for a permanent drummer. I said, well, whatever, come on up. So, and that led to the first Nirvana studio session, which was January 23rd of 1988.